Right, so I'm going to say straight up tonight, I am not going to be able to tell you everything I've planted, because I cannot remember, because I have planted over 30 trees today. So the names of what I've been planting and what it's replacing will be going up on screen. And so you might guess from that this is a slightly different planting than usual. So what I have done is I've gone from tree to tree of all my plantings, and the ones that are not showing above ground signs of life, some of which are still rooted and some of which I firmly believe will show signs of life. But if there's nothing visible above ground, I am planting another tree at the same location. Where there is a possibility it will come back, I am trying to plant things far enough away that they shouldn't interfere with each other, or things which should work quite well as a companion plant, and once they get a bit crowded can be propagated away. So anything that grows from cuttings, things like Araucaria and Dracaenas work very well in that sense, because you can let them grow as long as they get along with your tree, and you can cut them off at the soil level and move them away, and you have the space for your tree, having outgrown the need for its companion plants. But I did think it would be a good opportunity to talk about tree plantings generally, because I do think we tend to get these wonderful headlines like I get quite pessimistic sometimes. So I go to this site called the Good News Network, and they quite often have these wonderful headlines about how many millions or thousands of trees have been planted in this one big day event. And it's always important to remember with that is not going to be the number of trees that you end up with. I have planted over 500 trees this year. I am almost 100% certain. And I am hoping that by the end of this recording, I have over 400 trees alive in the soil. One of them does get slightly impaled, but it is a flesh wound, so I'm not too worried about that, because it's Brachystegia, and having said that none of them had died, one of them has, something ate it, but otherwise they are very, very tough plants, and I'm despite my clumsiness injuring one of the ones I planted today, they do tend to survive. But if I was to go out and plant 10,000 Brachystegia glabra here, not only would that not be a particularly useful environment for anything that doesn't specifically eat the flowers, leaves, or fruits of Brachystegia glabra, it would not lead to 10,000 Brachystegia glabras living in 2-3 years' time. And I'm not saying tree plantings are bad. I do think, generally speaking, if you're looking to restore most habitats, especially somewhere like Zambia, where the Miombo woodland is incredibly regenerative while there's a fragment of it left, the best thing to do is to let trees come up by themselves, which I have been doing as well. I do that everywhere that I can let trees come up. I let them come up. I take side branches off to encourage them to go up faster, basically mimicking the action of browsers. And feeding the side branches back to the soil, which really helps rebuild some of the more tired soils, because this is old agricultural land. Part of the reason I plant a lot of fruit trees is because fruit trees are quite good at encouraging other trees. And I have tried to move around a few local ones, and some of the native trees, which I feel would do well in this area but aren't currently present in this area, I have planted a few of as well. I have tried to encourage diversity in my planting this year, and even then, I feel I have underrepresented certain trees I would have liked to get, just because getting my hands on certain native trees that I would really like to encourage in this area is difficult. Like, I planted 2 Paranari, neither of which is currently showing any signs of life, and that is one of the most useful native trees. That is both medicinally and food and shade and timber a very useful tree. But a lot of the time, environment appropriate trees are not available, and certainly not in large numbers. So that is one issue with major tree plantings. The other issue is when you plant a lot of trees die. So I have planted well over 500 trees this year, and I would say I have lost at least a fifth of those, maybe slightly more. I'm hoping that by the end of this recording I have over 400 trees left, but I am not sure the actual full numbers I will come out with in January, because I have to go back through and count everything that I planted, and double check that I haven't misplaced some of those, because with the number of trees I planted and the grass coming up very fast at the moment, it's quite easy to not know where everything is. But the fireworks are making it very hard to think. But that loss level that I have seen, I would say, is far better than I expected going into this, and far better than you can expect for most event tree plantings. There are obviously occasions, for example in silviculture, where people tend to have higher rates of success, but a lot of the time that is plantations, and those are not that useful sort of environmentally. They're great for what they are, they're great for producing timber, they're great for capturing carbon in certain settings, but they're not providing the environmental service that I think a large group of trees should. A lot of the time when you see a headline about tree plantings saying this many trees were planted on this event to mark this day, especially if it's for a political reason, do not expect that to be the number of trees that actually survive. And when you take part in a tree planting, I do think it's very good to be pragmatic about the fact that probably between a tenth and a third of the trees that are planted, depending on the size of the planting very often, are going to survive. And you can make differences to that. So if you can get a real community effort, so you get people involved with directly caring for individual trees, so although it's a mass planting, it's an individual effort on each tree, you can quite drastically change the survival rates of mass plantings. And if you can manage to source local tree species, you can also affect that. Sourcing local trees can be quite problematic, which is part of the reason for planting sort of placeholder trees and expecting other trees to come up. And I think I've talked about that quite a lot over this year, that planting a tree isn't just expecting it to be that tree standing in a field in the long term. Planting a tree, in my view, should be very much about what will the impact of that tree be on this local area. So I planted a balsa, for example, which I do not expect to live long term. Balsa is not a long-lived tree, but it will go up, and that will create an environment around it where a lot of other things that are more sensitive can get established, can hopefully make the use of the shade that provides to build themselves in the humidity, in the environment it creates around it. And then by the time it comes down, it will not only feed the soil in a massive way, and hopefully also provide a fair amount of timber, it will also have allowed those plants to get to the point where they don't need it there anymore. And in the process of that, those will hopefully start fruiting, and those will attract things like the fruit bats currently complaining up in one of the trees, to bring seeds to the area, and you will get different trees popping up. The fruit bats who will be making noises in the background throughout this video, I suspect, because they do not like fireworks, are one that quite notoriously descends on Kasanka National Park in Zambia at the time that a type of tree called masuku, which is uapaka, is fruiting, and that is a fairly delicious local fruit. It's one of my favourite local fruits. I wouldn't say it is my favourite, but it is a really fantastic tree that I don't have here, but fruit bats can bring. This has happened with a couple of types of tree before. Before I planted any of the waterberries this year, several had popped up in different places. You might remember that I accidentally killed a rose apple that I tried to transplant where it had popped up inconveniently, but that had been planted by fruit bats, most probably. We've had fig trees planted by fruit bats and birds. We've had all sorts of different fruits pop up, some that I'd never heard of before they started fruiting. I do think that's one of the important things with tree plantings generally, is to not just plant trees, but also encourage trees that are coming up. Because in Zambia, we do have quite a resilient native vegetation. The Miombo woodland is very hardy. It can take a lot of damage, and it can spring back quite quickly, and it doesn't take much encouragement at all for it to then turn into quite a rich, dry forest rather than just a fairly flammable woodland. And although this will probably be going up in 2024, that will be everything for 2023. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. And if you haven't enjoyed it, thank you for watching anyway.